Rhonda Carter. I'm the associate dean, but also accounting professor, and I noticed see a lot of my class in here looking for your faces. So I've had you. But anyway, we're glad to have you today. Today we're honored to have Scott Voynich. He is the managing partner of Robinson Grimes and Company. So it's the largest local CPA firm. It's one of the largest CPA firms in Georgia. It's been around 80 years.
Yes.
You've been managing partner for 28 years. He doesn't look that old, but he's been managing partner for 28 years. So he began, he's graduated from the University of Georgia, but he has a son that graduated from Columbus State in accounting, and his other son took some courses here during the summer. So I've taught both of his sons. They're both with Robinson Grimes also. So he's had a really good, he's been very active in civic and professional organizations. He was president of the Georgia Society of CPAs from 1994 to 1995. And he was chairman of the AICPA, which is the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants, which is all CPAs across the United States. So for him to be chairman to be from Columbus, Georgia, from a local CPA firm, that just really says a lot about him, I think, personally, and his commitment to the CPA profession, and his just being honored with that position, how much they thought of him to honor him with the position as chairman. He's also taught at Columbus State back in the 70s. We'd like for him to teach again. He's going to be here today teaching too. His father was a professor for us for almost 20 years, I think, from the 60s to the late 80s. He has 3 children. I said 2 of them were accounting graduates. They have among them 5 children each. What's the oldest each is age 10?
10, yes.
So he has 15 grandchildren, the oldest 10 years old. I know one son has 5 girls. I think there's some boys in there somewhere, right?
Just a few.
But, that really, I'd be correct, yes. So anyway, he's advisor to the accounting department at Columbus Tech. He's a very active member of St. Anne's Parish, and I know Alan Tidwell is also, he's here somewhere. Lots of good things. Chairman of the Diocese Finance Council in Savannah, a lot of Home Builders Association, Columbus Building Authority, Chamber of Commerce Leadership Alumni, and along many, many other honors and activities that he's been in. So we'll let him come speak to you. Glad to have him here today.
Thank you. Thank you. I have a soft voice, so I'm going to do my very best. Sean said we don't normally mic up in this room, so good luck, folks. I'll do my best. I always like listening to somebody's bio, and because I always take it with a grain of salt. It's there's either much more to the story, or more often there's really a lot less. Simple parts of your life take on some grandeur when they get written down, and maybe the most important things that changed you and shaped you don't show up anywhere. So, I guess my simple point is to exercise real caution before you conclude anything about any of us. But my wife is a proud holder of undergrad and grad degrees from here at CSU in the education program. She started out teaching kindergarten, and she would always tell the parents at the beginning of the year, if you agree not to believe everything your child tells you is going on here at school, I'll agree not to believe everything they tell me is going on at home. I had the great good fortune of being surrounded by people with just unshakable integrity. I've tried to copy their best qualities. I'm sure I've failed more than I've succeeded, but at least I know what I should be doing. So today, I guess what I thought I would like to do is share some of the lessons that I've learned, and then you decide what you want to believe and if there's anything here for you. But either way, let's enjoy it. Like I say, I like to hear somebody's story. It gives me a better perspective on how to process what they're saying or what they're doing, because I have found that the stories and the events in your life shape your values and affect your course in ways that you don't really expect. I can't tell you the times where I wish I could withdraw something I said or an action that I did early in life, because I find it affects me 10 and 20 and 30 and 40 years later. You're tested without even knowing that you're being tested. And it's like everything else, what you do in the darkness ultimately shows up in the light, and that cumulative effect on your decisions and choices are dramatic. So I'll share some of my good ones, and I'll even share some of my bad ones, and you do something with it. I was born in Las Vegas, Nevada. My father was a career Air Force fighter pilot. He was part of that early jet crowd with F-84s and F-86s, and he flew until he couldn't. You're probably, you've been exposed to the Thunderbirds for the Air Force or the Blue Angels for the Navy and Marines. Well, what you probably don't know, and of course those elite pilots demonstrate, our expertise around the world and send a message maybe to our adversaries that we're a force to be reckoned with. Well, the original elite team was called the Sky Blazers, and the Sky Blazers came out of the old Army Air Corps that became the Air Force. And the Sky Blazers' purpose, and it was a 4-man group, and their job was to go intimidate people around the world and let them know just how good we were. It was a group out of my dad's buddies, and they would come to our parties, and I've got some great pictures at the house of these folks. But and as a kid, these were the original superheroes. I mean, it was amazing to be around the people like that. At that time, a pilot could check out a plane and just go fly. I mean, my 7th birthday was my dad and a buddy buzzing the house in their jets, just to have a little fun. But the world was a very different place, and the dollars available for that kind of spending are very different today. But after 23 years in the Air Force, when he could no longer fly jets, he returned to school to complete his PhD in quantitative economics. So, Air Force pilot to quantitative economics, and began his second career as a college professor. And we lived everywhere. I mentioned I was born in Las Vegas. We spent a few years in Alaska, California, Illinois, up to Massachusetts for a few years, back to Illinois. I finally got to Georgia when my dad was teaching at the University of Georgia in the business school. And then we came here to Columbus because he was the first head of what is now known as the College of Business. And so he was there and a professor until he retired in the late 80s. Just another story or two to give you perspective. When my dad was in his 50s and teaching full-time here, he called me over to the house and said, "Listen, I'm thinking about going to law school." I said, "Well, you going to quit your job teaching?" He said, "No, I'm going to teach full-time." So how are you going to do that? He said, "Well, when I'm teaching day classes, I'll go to Atlanta for night law school, and when I'm teaching night classes, I'll go to Atlanta for day school." I said, "You going to do all that full time?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "You going to wreck your health?" He said, "No, I've joined a health club. I'm going to work out 3 days a week." And he did exactly that. And in 3 years, while still teaching full time, he went to law school full time, passed the bar, demoralized his whole class of law students who were sitting beside him. Never formally practiced. He just wanted the challenge and wanted the education. I mean, his view was that life is an adventure, and that's something that's been important, I think, to me and my brothers. Because every time you hit a bump or you think that you've kind of exhausted the possibilities, his voice will kind of ring true that, no, it's okay. I mean, he was skydiving in his 50s, he was hang gliding in his 60s, and fixed wing gliding into his 70s, and died in his early 80s, and didn't run into anything, he just died. But he set the bar high for his 3 sons. I'm the youngest of 3, all accounting majors. I was kind of an impatient student who got out of high school a year early and started here at CSU. My father was my academic advisor, and it was really wonderful help having him get my classes for me. It wasn't wonderful having, however, him select my classes for me. I don't know what the options are today, but in my time you had a couple, I'll call them gimme classes that we business majors made sure and got, like an art appreciation class or the use of the library, or I didn't get those. He would go to the other department heads and say, he can handle it without the prereqs. Put him in this Governments of Europe class for juniors and seniors. I never had and again, I assume you still have a basic speech class today. I never had the basic speech class. I had, for seniors, at that time we had a debate class and a debate team. And I was put into the debate class and on the traveling debate team with no prerequisites. Again, I had a great education, but then I transferred to the University of Georgia where I could pick my own classes for the remainder of my career. And again, as you all are making decisions about school, et cetera, you know, how did I end up in accounting? I wasn't exactly sure what I wanted, but my dad, who was, you know, my advisor not just in school but in life, and somebody that I really respected, went through a real simple elimination process. You can't sing, you can't dance, you don't really show a strong interest in science. Sounds like a business major to me. I mean, literally, it was just about that simple. The part that really sold it, though, with his PhD in quantitative economics, was he said, look, it's, in his view at that time, it was the toughest major. It'll give you the most choices when you graduate. Since you don't really know what you want to do, you'll be able to knock on a lot of different kinds of doors. And then the real deal sealer for me was, and I don't know much about accounting. So it was, finally had something that my father didn't know much about, so that sold me on it. He'd previously had the same conversation with my two older brothers. Both of them couldn't sing or dance. Both of them became accounting majors. My oldest brother, Mike, was with Coca-Cola in their office in Atlanta his entire career, first in international accounting and then in the tax department. He went on to get master's degrees in international business and in tax, and worked his entire career with Coke. And Coke was very good to him until he retired, and now he spends his time telling me about his most recent vacation trip. Thank you very much. My brother Greg was also an accounting grad, and Greg was summa in undergrad and with honors in law school at Georgia. While he was in law school, we roomed together, and I was in undergrad, and he was a great student. And I just said, Greg, go back and get your CPA. I said, you can pass that thing in one sitting. And he said, I'm never going to practice accounting. He said, I'm finished my law degree and go on. I said, Greg, you just don't know, please. And I just kept hounding him, and he finally gave in, took the exam and passed it, because that was Greg. When he was graduating from law school, it was a fantastic market to go into the tax department of one of the national firms, and kind of a weak market for lawyers at the time. So he went into a national firm in the tax department, and he and I would sort of compare notes over the years. And after his 2 years, at that time it was 2 years to get your experience to become a CPA, I said, Greg, are you going to make the change to law? And he said, no. He said, I've been in so many deals where on the CPA side of the table, we help structure the transaction, and then those poor lawyers have to go write up the transaction and create mountains of documents, and then I get the privilege of critiquing what they've written and tell them what they need to change. And he said, I kind of like our side of the table better than theirs. So he stayed in public accounting. And after 8 years of comparing notes with me, in my experience in a local, now regional firm, he liked my notes better, and so he came down and joined us, and he practiced with us as the head of our tax department for 23 years. Well, in any event, back on my story, after graduation, or right before graduation, I had two resumes. One that said that my goal in life was to be in corporate accounting. It was to be an officer in a company somewhere. And my other resume said, my goal in life is to be a partner in a CPA firm. I didn't know what I wanted to do. You all may have a much better idea. I didn't know what I wanted to do. And I just hit the bricks and was knocking on doors and calling on contacts. And actually, I stumbled into public accounting, and it's the firm that I'm still with here this 40-something years later. I say stumbled because they didn't have a position when I applied, and one came open a week later. I didn't really know the story until many years later, but my ethics was tested in the first month that I was with the firm. The firm's office manager had left the quarterly payroll tax return on the glass on the photocopy machine. Well, the quarterly payroll tax return has everybody, including the owners, compensation on it and what they earn. I'm a brand new staff accountant. I'm just as curious as the next person. And I got a real dilemma. When I opened the copy machine and saw what was there, I knew what it was. I could tell that right away, and I kind of had to think, okay, what do I do? Do I close the machine, walk away, pretend I didn't see it, and let someone else deal with the consequences? Do I make a copy for myself? You know, it felt like minutes. It was probably seconds, but I didn't look at it. I took it straight to the office manager. I gave it to her, explaining where I'd found it. When she could stop gasping, she thanked me, and then I went back to my desk. Well, within about 2 minutes, two senior partners showed up in my office. And I look at it. The smart aleck in me wanted to say, "Nah, I just made a copy. I'll look at it later." But thankfully, that pretty poor choice in humor stayed just in my head. I didn't look at it. I realized it was very confidential information, and that we're in the business of treating confident information with great respect, and that I truly had just taken it straight to the office manager. Like I say, it's just that simple, singular incident at the beginning of my career tested my ethics, but in a way that I didn't really appreciate at the time. I mean, yes, it sent a message to the partners that I understood what they valued and respected. But it wasn't until years later that a senior partner brought that story back up to me and said, "You know, the position that opened up for you, the person before you had made a different ethical decision and we had to terminate them. And we picked up the phone and called you, and then here you were. It was almost fate that you're faced with almost a similar kind of issue within just a few weeks, and you passed." Thank you. A few years later, I was part of another test. A small owner in one of our clients had died. Well, the contract said that in the event of a termination or a death, or required to buy you out, that an audit would be performed as of the month preceding the date of death. So I did the audit. I presented the results, and felt like we were just marching right along. Well, I got notified by legal counsel that another CPA was going to challenge my work. Well, I was shocked. I mean, I knew this other CPA and knew them to be someone of fairly significant and prominence in the marketplace. And so I called and said, "What did I do wrong? I'm so embarrassed. Let me fix it. I don't understand." And then he laughed, and he said he was certain that I'd done a great job and that my audit was correct. But he was willing to testify otherwise to get a higher price for the attorneys who were representing the family of the deceased stockholder. I mean, I was just stunned. I mean, standards, ethics, values were all tossed out the window for money. And I was just, still a pup. I'd never encountered that kind of disregard for the core values of the profession. I went and told the senior partners at my office at the firm what was happening, and they were outraged. I mean, we'll spend whatever it takes. I don't care if it's our last dollar. This is just wrong, and right's right, and this isn't right. But, ultimately, in a situation like that, it's not our call whether to fight it or not. It's really up to the client. And I'll never forget my meeting with that client. After a lot of thought and soul searching, the client said, "Well, obviously I know that what you did was right." They respected my partners and their support, but what it boiled down to was they couldn't drag their family through the very public process of fighting this in court. As hard as it was, I understood they wanted to protect their privacy, which was much more important than the extra cost of this unfair settlement. But I learned a lot of lessons through that experience. Some people like that CPA are for sale, and I knew that I never wanted to be that person. Sometimes the bad actors get away with it. But in situations like that, you get to decide who you want to be, where you want to stand, and how you want to be known. I certainly wanted to stand with my partners. I certainly wanted to help my client from other bad actors. And I was reminded of my wife's kindergarten parent advice that things aren't always what they seem, and that applied to an awful lot of things in life. I was very fortunate to have gone to work where I did. Without those great influences, I might have drifted down that path of blurred visions and justifications for bad actions. Whenever I get a chance to talk to students, I always say, look, make your choice based on the people, not on the brick and mortar, not on the buildings, or, yes, I know money is important, but not even just the monetary benefits. I mean, you are known by the company that you keep, and I will never regret, having been blessed to begin my career with the right kind of company, with people who have their clear vision about right and wrong, people who demonstrate putting something back for the right reasons. And I'm still fortunate to work with folks that I enjoy and that I respect and admire and who challenge me every day. Well, going along the process, CPA exam, for the accounting majors, the CPA exam is an important part of your future and your opportunities. And I will tell you, I just got back from the American Institute of CPA's Governing Council. You have a lifetime appointment to it if you serve as chair and you're still alive. So, but the CPA designation globally is the most respected, and that sounds self-serving, but it's just a fact. It's the most respected accounting designation out there. It's a tough exam, it's a tough process, but no matter what you do, it's something that can make a huge difference. So I'll tell you my story. I took the exam in college, and I appropriately, miserably failed all 4 parts because I hadn't done the work. I bought the book, but it was probably still shrink-wrapped when I took the exam because I hadn't devoted the time and made the effort. But I learned my lesson, and it was lots of nights and weekends and whatnot. Took the exam. Back then, we waited on the mail. It was not an electronic process. Matter of fact, it became a, well, I was chair of the AICPS when we made it the computerized exam, but prior to that, it was a paper exam offered in May and November of each year. And you would wait for your grades to come in the mail. If you got a small envelope, that meant that either you got nothing or you passed some of it, but you weren't done. If you got a large envelope, I mean, you're done. Well, I was, going home to lunch every day checking the mailbox, and there was a large envelope with my name on it. I was excited. I sat down at the kitchen table and I just stared at it for a few minutes. And then I ripped open the envelope, pulled the stuff inside out, and it was somebody else's. It wasn't mine. It's like, I mean, maybe I hadn't passed. Maybe they swapped envelopes. I don't know. But I called the State Board of Accountancy, explained what happened, and asked for my results. And as you can imagine, the answer that I got was that we can't give that information out over the telephone, and that we will send out a new mailing that you'll get in the next 6 to 8 weeks. I realized I wasn't going to get the State Board to change their rules over the phone, so I went back to the office and shared what had happened with one of my partners who knew one of the State Board members very well, called him directly, explained what was going on. That State Board member had the information and said, yes, the bad news is he read out my grades one at a time for the whole firm to hear, but I passed. That's all that matters, passing. But yes, and so I had passed, but it was another one of those little life lessons that things are not always what they seem. Reserve judgment, slow down, don't just take the 3 or 4 facts that you've gotten. Things might be very, very different. But the other part of the process, and it was mentioned about our children and grandchildren. We have 3 that are all adults now, all married, each with 5 children. The 2 sons are CPAs and in practice, and older son, Stephen, of the 2, made partner with us this summer. The 15 grandchildren, and they're all here in town, are ages 10 down to 3 months, and so it can be pretty crazy at our place. But again, I'm learning lessons. I learned a lesson, learned lots of lessons from my children, and I'm learning lessons from the grandchildren. Our middle son, Stephen, was 3 or 4, and he saw the big jar of pennies. He said, "What's that for?" And I just flippantly said, "Oh, that's my retirement." Well, I wasn't thinking, because of course, what's a 3 or 4-year-old going to do? Well, what's retirement? So trying to explain retirement to a 3 or 4-year-old. I did, and that little kid sat there and thought about it, and he said, "Dad, that's not fair." He said, "You ought to be retired now while I'm here at home, and then when I grow up and move out, then you ought to go to work. That's how retirement ought to work." I said, "Well, I'll talk to my partners about it tomorrow and see if I can arrange something," which I didn't. It was a couple years ago. One of the grandsons was over at the house, and he was about 4 at the time. And I said, "David, we have bees in the chimney. I want you to help me go get the bees out of the chimney." "Okay, Papa." So we start walking back. On the way back, he said, "Papa, Mommy tells me that some bees don't sting. What kind of bees are these?" I said, "David, these are the kind that sting." I said, "But we're going to be brave and get the bees out of the chimney." "Okay, Papa." So I get back there, and I'm kneeling down at the fireplace, and as I'm opening the glass doors, I can see him backing up across the room. I said, "David, we're going to get the bees." He said, "Okay, Papa." I got the screen open. I said, "All right, David, it's time." He said, "Papa," and by this time he's all the way at the door. He said, "I'm going to be brave over here." I share that with the folks at the office sometimes, and with our clients sometimes, because when we're facing situations that require you to be brave and get something done, we don't need to be like David and be brave over here. Within the practice, we've always had a commitment to the profession. We had and still have a local chapter of our state society here in the Columbus area. And I got involved, and it was, again, very supported by the firm in the local chapter. Went through and became president of the chapter and all that kind of stuff. And at the time, my perspective was, we've got this figured out. We're doing a good job, but those idiots at the state level, they just keep coming up with this crazy stuff and they don't know what they're doing. But we got it figured out here. But you know what happens when you say that? You get appointed to the state organization. And I got on the state organization, served on the board, and ultimately served as president. And I learned that, well, you know, they don't really have it wrong. They're just more to the story than I was ever exposed to. And by the time you have these additional facts, these are pretty good decisions. But boy, those people at the national level, at the AICPA, they're idiots. So I got on the AICPA board. Same kind of thing. State level is about 10,000 members. The AICPA is about 400,000 members. The Chartered Institute of Management Accountants, CIMA, has created a merger that's just happened this year with the AICPA, and there's now what will ultimately be called a new AICPA. I'm not sure I can, the Association International Chartered Professional Accountants, AICPA, I think will be the ultimate end of it. We'll still have an AICPA public accounting, but the CIMA is more the management, corporate accounting side of things. It's a way to expand the footprint from about 400,000 to about 650,000 globally. It's a way to have representation around the world at a time where you're competing for who are going to be the ultimate winners in this marketplace. But any event, at the AICPA, when I went on that, you serve 3 years on the board, you serve as chair-elect, chair, immediate past chair. I put about 1.5 million miles on just my Delta account in 3 years, because you're traveling all over the country and some international, Singapore, some interesting places. Attended the Mexican Institute of Contadores Publico, which is their version of the CPA profession. And I was to give my speech, and there were 1,000 people assembled, and I found out as I was sitting there that I was supposed to give it in Spanish. And my Spanish was, you know, high school Spanish. So I got up and gave it in English, but I told them up front that because I did not understand that, I would keep it very short. I got a standing ovation because I kept it very short. But in that, and again, you get some great experiences traveling around the country and serving, but think about it. I mean, intimidating, oh my goodness. Serving on that board, I had people on the AICPA board. One fellow was the global expert on accounting derivatives. All of the national firms went to this guy because he was the global expert. I had someone who was the global tax expert for all of the national firms combined, and who was just considered the dean. We had ex-U.S. senators, we had ex-governors. Terry Branstad, who is the governor of Iowa right now, served as a public member on our board. Terry was the longest serving, 4-term, longest serving, youngest ever governor in the United States, served 4 terms as governor of Iowa, and then went into law practice, served on our board as a public member to give us another perspective, and then went back and is now serving as governor again in Iowa. So I mean, when you have people like that with experiences, you mostly just want to keep your mouth shut, because how can you say something intelligent in a setting like that? Again, another wonderful life lesson, and I would encourage you, if you don't take anything else away from this, take this, because everybody in here can use this. It was my 2nd meeting on that board, and again, I was still pretty darn intimidated, but we debated an issue. It's a 23-person board, and I disagreed. It wasn't a technical thing, but I disagreed, and I explained why. We took a vote, and the vote was 22 in favor and 1 opposed. Not being a jerk, but I felt like, look, I'm not convinced otherwise, so I at least need to vote my conscience. I'm going to support majority rule, and we'll move on. We went to a break, and I had probably 6 board members descend on me saying, I want to hear more about your disagreement. And I said, well, look, I respect the process. I'm going to go along and support the decision. No, but I want to hear more about your perspective on this. And so I shared it. We went back from the break, and something that you just don't do at a board like that. I mean, the agenda is so full and there's so much to do. And had members say, I want to reopen this issue. We talked about it another 15 minutes and took a new vote, and the new vote was 0 in favor, 23 opposed. I mean, it just put a brand on my forehead that, look, I knew I couldn't compete on smarts with these people. But what every one of us here have is you have your own perspective. I mean, your life experiences are different than mine and the person sitting next to you. And those experiences can add up to make the total difference in the day and what you come out on. So, you know, I got into a debate with this global derivatives accounting expert on an accounting issue, which was a dumb thing to do. I mean, this guy was mopping the floor with me. But we both stopped at the same time and laughed, because he was coming at it from the perspective of, what's the right accounting answer for my client, Microsoft? And I was coming at it from the perspective of, what's the right answer for my contractor client doing $10 or $15 million a year? Both of us maybe had the right answer for our constituency, but neither one of us really had the right answer for the public at large and the big picture. So great, great, great experiences. At that time that I was chair of the AICPA, I had the great pleasure of being there when all those nasty financial scandals were taking place. Enron, WorldCom, I mean, you just kind of go down the list, where people had taken the rules and used them maybe in their favor, but not coming out to the answer that was ever intended. Out of that, the Sarbanes-Oxley Act was passed, and the Public Company Accounting Oversight Board was formed. Well, our leadership participated in a joint interview with the major newspapers, and you'd know them all. I'm not going to name them, but we're in New York. How about that? So we participated in this major interview with major newspapers, and we said, look, we know that everything that we say is important because it could have a huge impact on the financial market. So we chose our words carefully, and we also audio taped the entire interview. Well, even during the interview, it was kind of frustrating because the journalists that came, and they're not bad people, they're just people, but the journalists that came kind of already had their opinions formed about what caused these problems and how it ought to be fixed. And so it almost felt like the articles were written before we even got there. But we went through the exercise and we audio taped it. Well, 2 days later, the interview was published, and there were quotes, significant quotes, troubling quotes that we didn't say. We didn't say. It's not on the tape. It didn't happen. Didn't happen outside, inside, anywhere. And we called and protested, and the short answer was, that's our story. And it was one of those, and again, I don't say this to, you know, trash the news industry or anything like that. It's more than anything, it's learning that, look, we all put on our own filters. I mean, you and I can observe the same wreck, and we're going to describe it differently. And we're going to even have different colored clothes on the people that you saw than just because we're made that way. So we hear sometimes what we want to hear, and we confirm our predetermined assumptions. So it was just a great lesson for me. I mean, besides being mad and frustrated about it and having to deal with it for some time out on the speaking trail, I still kind of learned to challenge my own assumptions, to maybe slow down, take everything that I hear with a little bit of a grain of salt, and just recognize that what's being said about this person or this situation might be just like what I experienced. Well, during that time, and here's another good story on it, the PCAOB was formed, and the SEC was kind of like their parent and still the overall responsibility. The AICPA, through the Auditing Standards Board, has set auditing standards for all these years. And Sarbanes-Oxley said from now on, public company audit standards will be set by this PCAOB and monitored by the SEC. Well, we had a new standard to come out, SAS 99, Statement on Auditing Standards 99 on fraud. And it was an important standard, and it was coming out at a time that the public really, really needed it. We still had responsibility, and still do, for setting standards for everybody else except the public companies. And when you think that, you know, there are 17,000 public companies and there are 400,000 or whatever the current number is of privately owned entities, that's a lot of people that we got to take care of. So we issued the standard. We issued the standard. The SEC chief accountant came out and roundly criticized us in all the major media. Said, look, the SEC and the new PCAOB are charged with setting auditing standards, and the AICPA has no right to intrude on their territory. Well, I'm out on the speaking trail all over the country and having members say, you guys are idiots. What are you doing? Why are you issuing these standards? And I'm trying to explain to them that, well, we've got a responsibility for the non-public company sector and that our decades of experience are important in protecting the interests. I still got hammered. But the rest of the story, and this is why I caution you, don't just take something and conclude quickly. What I couldn't tell them was that the night before we issued the standard and the night before the SEC came out and roundly criticized us, we got a call from the chief accountant of the SEC. I see your new standard on addressing fraud, and I think it's great. We aren't ready yet to assume our new responsibilities for setting auditing standards for public companies. Our teams are just not up and running yet. But your teams continue to issue important guidance. Please continue to do so. However, to make it clear to Congress and the financial reporting public that we're not abdicating our responsibilities, our plan is to criticize you for doing so, even though we want you to continue doing so. And over time, we'll criticize you less, and ultimately we'll convert that to thanks for your contributions. Are you in? And we said, yeah, we are. And the reason we said we are is because we understood that we were doing the right thing for the public. We were issuing the needed standards, and getting beat up for it was just part of the price. The public was served. It was a number of years before I could tell that story. For instance, the chief accountant of the SEC had to change more than once. We had to get a little distance. But it's another great lesson in that all isn't as it seems, and you just exercise caution. I joined the Northwestern Mutual Life Insurance Company board 8 years ago. Northwestern's a 160-year-old company with a $240 billion balance sheet. They have about $28 billion in annual revenues, and they rank number 100 on the Fortune 500. The company pays out over $5 billion a year in dividends, and that's more than the next 3 largest life insurance companies combined. I serve as a board member, as the audit committee chair. I serve on the executive committee, which is the one that has the authority to act on behalf of the entire board if you had to in a pinch do something. And we've used that a time or two. We try not to. Obviously, we try to convene the entire board for everything that we can, but as one of the committee chairs, we have this executive committee. And then I also serve as the financial expert for the board. So, for instance, setting that $5 billion dividend is responsibility of the audit committee. And I like to tease the other board members that I write the largest check of the year. But that's also a situation. When I went into that, I got the experience because I'd done the AICPA chair business. I had done a lot of public speaking. I had done some speaking at an event for Northwestern Mutual Life Insurance and then got recruited into the position. But you get there, and these are people who are, CEOs of major public companies and who are global experts in what they do, and coming from very, very different backgrounds than my experience. At one of my first meetings, one of the board members said, what time is your plane picking you up? And I said, being a smart aleck, I said, well, Delta said they're ready when I am, so I don't have that luxury, but if you'd like to swing by and pick me up, I'll be happy to go. As the audit committee chair and the financial expert, I've got to remain pretty close to our CEO, to the chief risk officer, the chief financial officer, the head legal counsel, the head of our enterprise risk, and then of course I coordinate with our outside auditors who are PwC. And I probably have some form of communication on a daily basis with somebody from the teams. The accounting majors here today understand the importance of independence for outside auditors. I mean, that independence is really one of the key factors that allow an auditor to express an opinion that the financial statements presented are fair and accurate. Well, Northwestern's outside auditors, PwC, certainly take that responsibility seriously. Some years ago, I had the lead audit partner set up a private meeting with me, all concerned, to discuss an independence issue and how they resolved it. They wanted to run it by me first and then present the whole story to the audit committee, and then they wanted me to comment, and I approved all that. So we get into the full committee meeting, and it's the audit committee, it's the senior officers of the company, and the PwC lead partner, and 2 other folks, and they told the story. And the story is this, that a young fellow on the audit team had asked out on a date a young lady in the actuarial department. not exactly an appearance of independence if you're dating who you're auditing. You can't do that. Well, thank goodness it was discovered quickly. The young audit fellow was removed from the engagement. The work he had done was performed again and again by another member of the team, so the independence issue was resolved. And the lead PwC audit partner completed her presentation, and then the group turned to me for my reaction. I told him the independence issue was properly resolved and I was satisfied. But more importantly, I told him, since the only business majors with less personality than accountants are actuaries, I was thrilled that someone in the actuarial department had actually gotten a date. The chief actuary, who's a very good friend, did not like my joke. But another great lesson. You know, in school, independence is just drilled into your head. In public accounting, it's preached on a daily basis. But in the real world, emotions and relationships can cloud your thinking and confuse your role. And we have to constantly test our thinking and our reactions to the world around us. You know, as a student, you make decisions every day about how to respond in class. You gauge how well your opinion will be received and whether it's worth the cost. In work, your opinion or your unvoiced concern can be the difference between the right answer or the wrong answer. And I would tell you to challenge yourself to speak up and engage, because we need you. You know, in school, the professor says, okay, here's the question, here are the facts, develop an answer or pick one of the following 5 or whatever. In the work environment, most of the time, a client doesn't come to us with a question. We've got to recognize, hey, I need to raise something here. There's probably a problem here. I was reading something the other night that tells me this might be an issue. So you not only, a lot of times, have to develop the question, you don't have an authority to tell you that you have all the facts or the right facts or enough facts, and you don't have an unlimited budget to keep developing facts. And oh, by the way, give me more than one good answer. It's like the congressman that told me one time, I need a tax return that can't be challenged, so don't take any risky positions on my tax return because I can't handle the embarrassment. And I said, well, get me a new Congress to write better law. I said, because nobody can file a return that can't be challenged. I tell our people at the office, if we do our job right, a lot of times we hopefully will have built a relationship where we know our client better than their priest, minister, rabbi, their doctor, their lawyer, and sometimes spouse. Pretty bold statement, but what's the message? Well, the message is we know what things they care about. We know what causes they give to because it's good business versus what causes they give to from the heart. We know how much debt they have regardless of how wonderful their life looks. We know what kind of shape they're really in. We know who's going to inherit assets outright versus who's going to inherit assets with strings attached to it. We know who's going to take over the company versus who thinks they're going to take over the company. Sometimes we know the things we don't want to know, like about that secret apartment and you know, other behavior. But if you do it right, you will be privileged, as I have, to have the experience of having the client stop at the office and say, it's terminal, I haven't told the family yet, give me about 2 weeks, and then I need you to help me finish getting my affairs in order. I mean, you don't have that because you have the best technical answer. You have that because you build a relationship and you make a commitment to somebody. As I was leaving the office, 10 people were returning, who'd been in Washington, D.C. for us at a conference. And we're a 60-person firm. Why in the world would you send 10 people to one conference? Perspective, the very same thing I've been talking about. If I've got multiple people from the audit area, from the tax area, from the technology area hearing the same thing, I will get different answers. I will get different perspectives on whether we ought to go down this path or go down that path. Huge and wonderful investment that pays off for us a million different ways. I'll tell you one more quick one, and then I want to just run through a few things and hush. Monsanto case. If anybody saw that in the paper, the SEC was very proud of the new whistleblower rules that came out of the Dodd-Frank Act. And that out of the Monsanto case, that Monsanto had been fined $80 million, and that the whistleblower who told on them got $22 million of that. Isn't that great? Doesn't that demonstrate that the whistleblower program is working very well? Well, I could be wrong, but I did a little bit of reading on the Monsanto case. Monsanto makes Roundup, you know, what you spray to kill the weeds in your yard. The Roundup people had a sales event and said to their distributors, look, if you'll sell this much of this product, we will give you these kind of rebates. Well, perfect accounting would say you probably ought to be recording along your best estimate of how much of a liability you're going to have for those rebates that you're going to have to give back. Because of the timing of this thing, which was like 20-something days before their year end, something got a little lost in the muddle. They didn't do that, and they were recording the expense once it became clear that somebody had earned this rebate. It was $50 million of expense that should have fallen in this year that fell in this year. And you say, well, that's a big number on $10 billion in sales. I'm sorry, but that's kind of a rounding error in the actual performance of the company. The person who raised the issue was somebody who raised it a little bit at the office and then shut up so that they could then go to the SEC and say, well, I raised it, now I'm eligible for this penalty. You can even participate in these rules in creating the bad effect. And if you didn't personally get a check, then you can go pursue it in the whistleblowers. Good idea, but it's a bad piece of action that's going on out there. So I'm just saying, careful. All right, let me just boil this down to about 7 basic things that are maybe the lessons learned for me, and then, again, now a 60-person CPA firm and having had these experiences over the last 40 years. 1, giving advice. Hey, look, all we can do is provide options. We can provide our best counsel, but we got to recognize that the person hearing the advice is the one who bears the risk on executing it. So our job, and I always tell the client, I say, look, I'll tell you what my best thinking is, and then you're going to tell me what you want to do, and then my job becomes how to make successful whatever it is you choose, even if it's not what I'm recommending. Wielding power and position. Oh my goodness. Be generous, be kind, be thoughtful. Because you can get the best deal does not mean that you should. Others work hard to take care of you, and you need to respect their role and their efforts and not take advantage of your strength over them. We had a vendor come to us one time, and it was something that we wanted. I mean, we'd been researching. We said, these are probably the people we want to work with. This is about what the market price is that they charge, and we think they'll be a good partner with us. They came, interviewed them, and they offered us this discounted price. And I said, tell me your price again. Well, they obviously thought that I was trying to beat them down. And they said, well, now this is just, where we're starting. I said, no, tell me what your normal price is. Oh, well, our normal price is boom. And I said, yeah, that's what I thought. I said, we won't work with you for this price. And the guy said, what do you mean? I said, I'll only work for you for your normal price. I said, 1, you need to make a decent living. I want somebody that when we pick up the phone, you're going to say, these are good people. I want to take care of them. I want to do what needs to be done. The difference between that discount and this bought us, as it should, an awful lot of loyalty, a vendor relationship that's gone on for 20 plus years now. But more importantly, and we're going to pay a bill in the return mail. I'm not going to hold you up to the last second because the math says that I can drag you out and drag you out. I don't want to live that way. I don't want people to live that way. And it just makes me crazy sometimes to see people with means take advantage of that in terms of wielding power and position. 3, help people, don't sell people. Use your skills, your abilities, your product offerings, or whatever it is to improve people's lives. Build a relationship. You add value, and your value will be because you helped, not because you sold. As my grandson, be brave, not intimidated. No matter how smart the competition, no one else has your life experiences or your perspective. Be willing to take on the difficult issues when there's a cost. In this age, information is a commodity, but counsel is not. Counsel is highly sought after and highly valued. But to give effective counsel, you've got to have courage and you've got to be brave. 5, build consensus. Build it where it's possible. Sure, there are some situations that don't allow for it, and a leader must forge ahead, but too often, leaders mistake their role for that of an omnipotent and don't engage others in the thought process. Yes, someone ultimately has to make the decision, but engaging others grows the knowledge base, it adds to the collective wisdom, and it generally arrives at not only a better outcome, but also one that folks will rally around since they had a hand in the process. 6, act with integrity in all matters. This certainly ties into courage, but it's what allows your courage to be fair and not a bully, to be strong without being intimidating. Integrity is what helps you strive for the right answer. And then last but not least, lead with humility and be grateful. You must be able to own up to your mistakes, recognize your personal limitations, and recognize and acknowledge the strength of others. Quick side story, I was in New York well, a lot, but this trip was 6 months ago. Northwestern Mutual had bought a company called LearnVest, and LearnVest is offering financial counseling opportunities and procedures across the internet, and we were visiting with the LearnVest people, and it's like typical startup. I mean, the liquor bottles are lined up for, version 1 and version 2 of software, and I mean, but PhDs filling the room from all parts of the world, some of the brightest, smartest people in the world, and I had a chance to spend time with their technology team. And at one point in their presentation, they said, that humility was what was key to everything that they do. And I said, feather that out for me. Tell me more about it. And they said, well, look, we got to get the smartest, brightest people, but just as you're saying here, they got to be able to admit their mistakes. They got to be able to recognize that they don't have all the answers, and the person next to them may make the difference in that conversation. You must be part of a team that rises and falls together. I always tell my partners that, look, I want to be holding hands not only when we achieve success, but also when we hit bottom. At the end of each year, and it's kind of gotten to be repetitive, but I think it says it all. There's a statement that I share with them at the end of every one of our years. It is true that we have a great group of talented, successful, competitive people. We make smart decisions, we take appropriate risks, and we expect rewards for our efforts. But even accounting for all of that, we are unbelievably lucky, blessed, and fortunate to have it all come together as it does to provide us this incredible environment and opportunity to live as we're able to live. And I will close with the best lesson in humility that I ever had. I'd been in the firm for a few years, enough to feel pretty important and indispensable. I had a project that was going to be taking me away from some other important areas, and I felt like those areas needed my exclusive attention. And I sat down with our senior partner at the time, and I explained my many responsibilities and how important it was for me to participate and lead them. I just didn't know what was going to happen without me available for all of them. He listened very patiently while I talked, and finally when I stopped talking, he probably looked at me for a full minute, and then he pushed his glass of water over in front of me. He said, watch this. Put his finger down into the glass of water, pulled it out. You see a hole in that water? I said, no, there's no hole in the water. When you pulled your finger out, it just filled right in. He said, that's right. It's the same when you're not here. The hole just fills right in. You're not that big a deal. A great early lesson in humility, and one that I repeat out of not only tribute to him, he's passed away now, but also to slow me down when I read my bio and start to feel a little important. So in any event, thank you for listening. I enjoyed being with you today.